Chapter 10. No help at all. So since the Navy wasn't available, we've just done the best we could on our own, Commander. Major Barney is variant. Medusa's Native Protection Agency was a short, sturdy man. He sat almost painfully erect in his comfortable chair, his marine background showing in his discomfort at sitting in the presence of a warship's captain, but there was no apology in his face or voice. I understand, Major. Hunter gestured for Stuart McGinnis to replenish his variant's coffee cup and sip their own cocoa, using the mug to cover a sideways glance at Alistair McKean. The executive officer had said very little while this variant listed all the things the Navy hadn't done for Medusa, but she sensed the discomfort lurking behind his stiffly formal facade, and wondered if he felt as ashamed as she did. "All right," she said. She set her mug aside and nodded. "As I understand what you and Dame Estelle are saying, Major Isvarion, your greatest immediate need is for help with inspection of orbital transfers and space-to-ground traffic. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Isvarion shrugged. "As I say, we do our best, but most of us don't really know what to look for, or where to find it if it's hidden. A fair number of us have previous military experience, but it's not the right kind." Honor nodded again. The NPA's officers and troopers were mainly ex-Army, ex-Marine, or regular police. It wasn't the sort of job which would attract required Navy personnel. And had the fleet been doing its job, their skills would have been of very little value to the NPA anyway. We know damned well, pardon me, that they're getting stuff past us, but we don't know enough about cargo shuttles to find it, and it's even worse aboard ship. Understood. I think we'll be able to take care of that part of it, but we're short-handed. If I can scare up inspection parties for you, do you think the NPA could help us out with flight crews for our cutters?" "We can do better than that, ma'am," Isvarion said. "Dame Estelle managed to find 3 fleet pinnaces about a year back, and we've got 2 boarding shuttles on our official equipment list. I'm pretty sure we can put all 5 of them at your disposal, with enough NPA types to fill in any holes in their complements." "Now that, Major, is good news," Honor said warmly, wondering just how Dame Estelle's people had managed to find fleet small craft, especially armed ones. But she wasn't about to question such unanticipated good fortune. She'd been afraid Fearless herself would be tied down ferrying her slow, shorter-legged cutters back and forth between parking orbits. She rubbed the tip of her nose with a forefinger for a moment, thinking hard, then nodded to herself. "I think we can come up with pilots, boarding officers, and inspection parties for all of them, Major. What we'll need from you will be comm officers, flight engineers, and groundside maintenance personnel. Can do." "Can do, ma'am," Isvarion grinned as he threw the Royal Manticore Marine Corps motto back at her. "Good. Then I think that only leaves the matter of general traffic control. How have you been handling that?" "Not very well, ma'am. We've got a flight center down in the Commissioner's compound, but it was really intended for atmospheric control only. Even there, the designers never anticipated the sheer number of off-worlders we've got wandering around these days. We're short on controllers and radar. We've got the space controls left an awful lot of outback airspace completely uncovered." "I see," Honor glanced at McKean. "Exec, suppose we reconfigure a dozen or so survey sets and tie their weather radar into the air traffic control net." "We could." This time it was McKean's turn to rub his nose and frown. "We're making a mighty big dent in our equipment list, ma'am," he warned. "I know, but I don't see an option, and it's there to be used, Exec." McKean nodded, eyes slitted in thought, and Honor wondered if he even realized he'd said weird instead of your. "Then I think we can do it, but the radar sets aren't going to get as good a paint off of any aircraft as standard ground radar would, and they're not set up for air traffic quality Doppler. They're intended more for radar mapping and weather observation, not real look-down capability, and air masses don't move that fast." He frowned some more. "If you'll give me a day or two with Santos and Cardones, I think between us we can come up with a fix to refine their target differentiation, and we should be able to work on a decent Doppler and ranging capability too, especially if we set them up in pairs. It'll be rough, but it should work." "Good," Honor said. The survey satellites were standard issue and rarely used, since regular warships seldom pulled survey duty. They were also short-range and simple-minded, but they should suffice for this. Of course, McKean was right about the carnage she was wreaking with her equipment list. Just her sensor network had cost the RMN somewhere in the vicinity of $200 million, even assuming most of the probe heads were recoverable, and she'd personally signed for every penny of it. But there was no other way to get the job done, and if the Admiralty on to his variant. I'd like to leave air-breathing traffic in NPA hands and set up a space traffic control center staffed by our own people. She toyed with her cocoa cup for a moment while she considered. Better make it a ground station, I think, in case something comes up out system and we get called away. In fact, we might install it right next door to your air traffic people so they can coordinate better. What do you think, exactly? I think we're gonna be lucky if we're still at half strength when the dust settles, McKean replied, using the calculator mode of his memo pad to check figures. By the time we crew those pinnaces and shuttles, we'll have another 40 of our people on detached duty, man. We can probably use Marines to eke out the ratings and the inspection crews, but when you add enough fleet people to man a control center on top of that, he shrugged. Agreed, but I think it's necessary, Honor said quietly. She kept her gaze on McKean's face, but her eyes cut sideways at his variant for a moment, reminding the exact of their audience, and McKean nodded. It wasn't a happy nod, nor a graceful one, but it was a nod. We've still got that recon head we reserved to cover Medusa in our absence, she continued after a moment. Limited endurance won't be much of a problem if we can get at it for regular service, so we can go ahead and deploy it in high orbit to cover the far side of the planet and use our onboard instrumentation to feed the ground center from this side. If we have to pull out, the air search radar we saved with the survey sats can revert to covering space traffic in our sector. Who are you planning to put in command the ground side, ma'am? McKean asked. Honor drummed on the tabletop for a moment, pleased to see him engage with the problem, but wishing he'd made the next step in resuming his responsibilities and suggesting someone. He'd known most of her officers months, in some cases years longer than she had, but she decided to concentrate on what he was doing after their unpromising beginning, and furrowed her forehead in thought. I think he could either Webster or Stromboli, she said finally. She felt McKean start to protest, then stop himself as he ran through the possible candidates in his own mind. I'd really rather use Webster, she went on, half to herself and half to him. He's younger, but I think he's more aggressive and confident. Unfortunately, we need someone with a background in astrogation and traffic control, and that means Stromboli. What about Ensign Tremaine? McKean countered. Tremaine was Fearless's boat bay control officer and something of a prodigy in the management of his assets, but Honor shook her head. Not for the controller slot. We need someone senior enough to assume overall command of the detachment groundside and upstairs if Fearless has to pull out. I prefer to kill two birds with one stone and make that our control officer. Besides, I think we'll need Tremaine to manage the actual inspection flights. That'll bump Panowski down to acting astrogator, McKean mused, tapping a fingertip on his memo pad. Then he surprised both Honor and himself with a grin. Actually, I think it might be good for him, man. He's got a tendency to coast unless someone keeps after him, and Max has been too easy on him. In that case, let's definitely make it Stromboli, Hunter said. With Tremaine as his exec, we'll need a few good petty officers to command the small craft, and I'd like them to have some experience in customs works if possible. Do we have anyone who does? McKean turned to one of the conference table's full-size terminals and tapped the query into it. Then he shook his head. Sorry, ma'am. Chief Killian did a stint as a regular helmsman for an SD's boarding officer 2 commissions ago, but that's as close as we've got. And I am not going to give up Chief Killian, Honor frowned, then smiled. I think I may have another idea, though. She depressed an intercom key. Officer of the watch, Lieutenant Stromboli's voice replied. This is the captain, Lieutenant. Please ask the bosun and the captain to come to my briefing room. Aye, ma'am. Honor released the button and leaned back, hiding her enjoyment behind his serene expression as his variant McKean looked first at her, then at one another. She hummed softly to herself, letting them wonder until the hatch hissed open. Senior Chief Boatswain mate Sally McBride stepped through it and braced to attention. McBride's left sleeve bore 5 gold hash marks, each representing 3 Manticore years over 5 T years of service, and she was just about due for a 6th. She was a sturdy, level-eyed woman and the senior non-commissioned officer aboard Fearless. The captain sent for me. Yes, thank you, bosun, Honor nodded for McBride to stand easy. I need some people with rather specialized talents, and I thought you might be able to help me out. Whatever the captain requires, ma'am. McBride was a native of Griffin, as were a surprisingly high percentage of the RMN's non-coms, given the planet's relatively sparse population. Manticore B's single habitable planet was the least hospitable, and last settled of the Manticore system's 3 Earth-like worlds, and native Manticoreans and Sphinxians ordered that Griffins only joined the Navy to escape escape Griffin's weather. For their own part, the Queen's Griffin-born subject seems to feel its divine mission to keep the sissies of Manticore A in shape. The divergence of opinion led to occasional off-duty discussions that can make them a bit difficult to live with, but Honor was glad she had McBride. The bosun was the indispensable link between the bridge officers and enlisted personnel aboard any warship, and McBride had all the tough professional competence of her years of service. I'm not going to ask you to betray any secrets, Bosun, Honor said, but what I'm looking for are people who, from their own experience, let us say, would be intimately familiar with the best way to hide contraband aboard a shuttle or a starship. McBride's left eyebrow rose fractionally. Otherwise, there was no change in her expression at all. I need them to form a core of the customs inspections party I'll be detailing to Medusa. So in addition to their expertise, I need people with initiative and discretion. Can you find them for me? How many people was the captain thinking of? Oh, let's say 15, Honor said, ignoring the atypical amusement glinting in McKean's gray eyes. Well, we're running 3 pinnaces and 2 shuttles, and I'd like to have 1 in each watch aboard each of them. I see, McBride thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, ma'am, I can find them. Will the captain require anything else? No, bosun. Let the exec have a list by the end of the watch. Aye, ma'am. McBride braced to attention, turned smartly, and disappeared through the hatch. It closed behind her. Excuse me, Captain, Major Isvarian said in a very careful voice, but did I just hear you ask the bosun to find you 15 smugglers to man our customs flights? Of course not, Major. This is a Queen ship. What would we be doing with smugglers on board? On the other hand, I'm certain that, over the years, certain of my personnel have observed other personnel who have attempted to conceal prescribed materials aboard ship. Sad to say, some may even have known individuals who've engaged in black market activities aboard Navy vessels. I simply asked the bosun to find me some of those observers. I see, Isvarian murmured. He took a large sip of coffee and put his cup back down. I see indeed. Captain. Honor looked up as Surgeon Commander Suchon stuck her head through the open briefing room's hatch. Fearless's doctor looked even more sour than usual, and she carried a data chip in her right hand. She held the chip as if it were a small, dead animal, and Honor felt a stronger surge of distaste for her as she recognized it. Yes, Doctor. May I speak with you a minute? Speak with you a minute, Suchon asked. Whined, really, Honor thought. Come in, Doctor. Honor tried not to sigh and pressed the button by her terminal, closing the hatch behind Suchon as the commander crossed to the table and sat, without an invitation. That last action irritated Honor out of all proportion to the provocation, and she sat on her temper rather firmly. Suchon sat silently, face screwed up in obvious indecision over how to proceed. Honor waited for a moment, then arched her eyebrows. What is it, Doctor? She inquired. It's about these orders, Captain. Suchon raised her hand to the data chip, and Honor nodded. What about them? Captain, I don't think it's a good idea you've detached Lieutenant Montoya and all 4 of my best sick berth attendants to the custom parties, and I need them here in Fearless. I can't guarantee my ability to meet my medical responsibilities to the ship without them. Suchon leaned back in her chair as she completed her sentence. There was a certain smugness in her expression, the look of someone who had just delivered an ultimatum to a superior officer, and Honor regarded her levelly for several seconds. I'm afraid you're just going to have to get along without them, Doctor, she said at last, and Suchon sat back upright with a jerk. But I can't. If I have to detach them, the sickbay workload will be impossible, and Montoya is my sole physician's assistant. I'm aware of that. Honor made herself maintain a level tone, but there was very little liking in her brown eyes. I'm also aware that it's the Navy's responsibility to provide medical personnel to check the health and immunization records of any individual visiting Medusa's surface. Every other department aboard this ship is contributing to those customs parties, Doctors. I'm afraid medical would just have to carry its share of the burden as well. But I can't do it, I tell you, Suchon more than half snapped. Perhaps you don't quite understand the responsibilities medical faces, ma'am. We're not like that will be enough, Doctor. Honor's voice had not risen, but it carried such a cold, quiet venom that Suchon jerked back in her chair in shock. Icy brown eyes surveyed her with deadly dispassion, and her dark face paled. What you mean, Doctor, Honor went on after a moment in that same cold voice, is that if I detach your attendants, and especially Montoya, who's been carrying 2/3 of your load ever since I came aboard, you will be required smile. Before you explain to me that I don't understand the arcana of your profession, Commander, she said softly, I should perhaps mention to you that both of my parents are physicians. Suchan paled once more. In fact, my father was a surgeon commander himself before his retirement, Dr. Alfred Harrington. Perhaps you've heard of him. Her smile grew even thinner as Suchan recognized the name. Alfred Harrington had been assistant chief of neurosurgery at Basingford Medical Center, the fleet's main hospital on Mandragora, before his retirement. As a result, Doctor, I think you'll find I have quite an adequate grasp of precisely what your duties to the ship entail, and I might add, since the topic has come up, that I'm not at all satisfied with the way you've discharged those duties since I assumed command. Her smile vanished and Suchan swallowed. If, however, the 5 individuals you mentioned are indeed indispensable to Fearless's medical department, Honor went on after a short, pregnant pause, I'm certain I can make other arrangements to keep them aboard. Of course, in that eventuality, it will be necessary to find some single individual with sufficient medical experience to replace all 5 of them to assign to the customs detachment. Someone like you, Dr. Suchan. She held the surgeon commander's eyes with a cold, level stare, and it was Suchan who looked away. Was there anything else, Doctor? Honor asked softly. The physician gave a choppy headshake, and Honor nodded. Dismissed then, Doctor. She returned her attention to her terminal, and Commander Suchan rose and walked silently from the compartment. Lieutenant Andreas Venizelos stood with his memo board under his arm and smiled politely at the red-faced Havenite merchant skipper. So you can take yourself and your mangy customs party and go straight to hell. The Havenite finished his diatribe and stood gazing at the slim officer before him. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Captain Merker, the lieutenant replied with punctilious courtesy. According to Basilisk Control, you transship cargo at, he consulted his memo board, Orbital Warehouse Baker Tango 1-4. As I'm sure you're aware, that constitutes a materials transfer in Manticore space. As such, under paragraph 10, subsection 3 of the commercial regulations as amended by Parliament in 2788L, the senior customs officer is required to inspect your cargo before passing you for transit to the Junction Central Nexus. Accordingly, I'm afraid I must insist on carrying out my duties before I clear you for transit. I am, of course, extremely sorry for any inconvenience this may cause. Captain Merker had turned an alarming shade of puce and sputtered incoherently. Venizelos simply cocked his head and waited with undiminished courtesy while he got his vocal apparatus unjammed. God damn it, I've been making this run for 5 years, the captain finally roared, and this is the first time some tight-ass little faggot in a pretty uniform's boarded my ship. Some tight-ass little faggot in a pretty uniform boarded my ship and ordered me to heave to for inspection. I'll see you damn first, by God. Perhaps, sir, Venizelos said, allowing his smile to fade. But if you choose to refuse inspection, you will be denied transit rights. And how the fuck do you think you're gonna stop me, pretty boy? Merker sneered. By firing into your ship if you attempt to transit, Venizelos said, and there was no give it all in his ice-cold voice. The merchant skipper stopped in mid-sneer and gave the slightly built lieutenant an incredulous stare. That would be an act of war. On the contrary, sir, it would be a simple exercise of the municipal police power in Manticore space in strict accordance with the recognized interstellar law. You wouldn't dare, Merker said in a more conversational tone. You are bluffing. I am an officer of the Royal Manticore Navy, sir. Venizelos felt an undeniable rush of adrenaline and pleasure as he faced the burly captain squarely, and the Royal Manticore Navy does not bluff. He held the Havenite officer's eyes steadily, and the captain's color cooled visibly. He dropped his eyes with a scowl at the deck for just a moment, then shrugged angrily. I'll suit yourself, Captain Merker. The freighter's purser, who had stood silently throughout the exchange, looked undeniably anxious. Well, what is it, Merker growled. Well, sir, it's just that I'm afraid there may be a few, errors in our manifest. Sweat dotted the purser's forehead as his harassed captain turned his scowl on him. I'm certain there were simply oversights, he continued. My staff and I can clear them up and be ready for inspection in 2 or 3 hours, sir. He stared at his captain appealingly, and Merker's face began to congest with fury once more. Venizelos observed its color with interest and cleared his throat. Excuse me, Captain Marker. The captain whirled on him with clenched fist, and the lieutenant shrugged apologetically. I can certainly understand how these little accidents happen, sir, and I'm certainly willing to allow your purser time to straighten out his records. Unfortunately, that will mean that your ship will lose its place in the outbound queue, and I'm afraid we probably won't be able to get back around to you until sometime tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning? Merker exploded. You mean I have to cool my heels in this misbegotten rat hole of a... He chopped himself off and gave the hapless purser a deadly glare, then turned back to Venizelos with a snarl. All right, if I have to, I have to, but if my embassy on Manticore is going to hear about this, Lieutenant... Of course, sir. Venizelos clicked to attention, nodded pleasantly, and marched smartly back down the tube to his pinnace. His hatch slid shut, the tube disengaged, and his pilot hit the thrusters to carry them beyond the impeller wedge's safety perimeter before lighting off the main drive. Venizelos deposited his memo board on his pull-out desk and flopped back into his chair and whistled a popular ditty as the pinnace turned towards the next ship on his list, a big, battered Silesian freighter. His second pinnace hovered respectfully off the Havenite ship's flank like a pointed reminder until Merker lit off his own drive and headed back beyond the departure threshold. Jesus, Andreas, Hayne Duvalier, Captain Reynos, liaison to Venizelos' customs party, stared at him in patent disbelief. You would really have fired into him, would you? Yep, Venizelos said. But I'm only doing my job, Hank. I know, but for Christ's sakes, Andreas, we haven't enforced the comm rigs out here in hell. I don't think they've ever been enforced. ACS never had the manpower for it. I know, Venizelos turned in his chair to face him. In fact, since I got here, I've started to realize that a lot of things that should have been done never had. I'm not faulting Captain Reno and your people either. It's not your job, it's ours, and we haven't been doing it. Well, we're doing it now. Somehow I sort of doubt your captain's going to thank you for all the ruckus it's going to raise, Duvalier said dubiously. Maybe not, but she gave me my orders, and one thing I can tell you about Commander Harrington, Hayne, when she gives an order, she expects it to be obeyed, period. Sounds like a real hard-ass to me, Duvalier grumbled. Oh, she is, Venizelos said with a smile. In fact, I'm just starting to realize how hard a hard-ass she is. And you know something, Hayne? I like it. Chapter 11. Lieutenant Max Stromboli straightened with a bone-deep sigh and racked his tools neatly. Other members of his minute staff were busy elsewhere, mounting the transmission dishes on the tower roof, but there were too few of them for him to stand back and leave it all to the techs. Besides, he still installed a premium circuit board himself, he thought, regarding the console with proprietary pride. Not that pride was the first thing he'd felt on arriving to Medusa's surface. He'd just started to feel himself slipping back into the groove aboard Fearless after the shock of being banished to Basilisk Station, when he'd found himself banished yet again, this time clear out of the ship. He dropped into the cushioned bucket seat and brought his panel online, plunging into the new space control data net fed by Fearless's sensors and the deployed recon probe, and smiled as the transplanted holo display came alive. It looked perfect, but he'd set up a computer systems test just in case, leaned back while the computers ran it. The captain, he reflected, didn't do anything by halves, and she didn't have much patience with anyone who did, like a certain lieutenant senior grade Maxwell Artois Stromboli, who'd been dragging his ass and feeling sorry for himself ever since fleet exercise, he admitted. Max Stromboli didn't consider himself the most brilliant officer the planet of Manticore had ever produced, but he knew he was better than he'd let himself become. He'd been slacking off like a sulky kid, and when Captain Harrington had asked him for that course to Medusa he didn't have, he shuddered in memory. God, he'd expected her to bite off his head and spit down his neck, and he knew he would have deserved it, but she hadn't. She'd only sat there, waiting patiently, and he felt about a centimeter high while he figured out the course, mostly because she wasn't jumping his shit in front of the entire bridge wash. And this job wasn't the slap in the face he'd first thought either. He'd admitted that too. Medusa's atmosphere might smell like the downwind side of a chemical refinery with buggered filtration, and the natives might look like some sort of circus grease, but his assignment was more important than he thought. He'd realized that the moment he saw the jury-rigged lash-up with which the NPA had been trying to watch the high orbitals, they greeted him and his people with a sighed and swiveled his chair to check the first test printouts. They looked good, and he let the hard copies spill into the printer tray and looked out the window. Lord, what a piss-poor excuse for a planet. His newly installed control center was on the upper floor of one of the government compound's corner towers, and he had an appallingly good view of cliques and cliques of gray-green mottled moss. It stretched down to the bank of something the natives called a river. The greasy-looking, turgid flow, heavy with silt, was one of hundreds of channels cutting through the swampy delta, and the walls of a stilty city rose beyond it. He lifted a pair of electronic binoculars from a console and peered through them at the distant curtain wall fronting the river. The binocs brought it to arm's length, and he marveled at the size of its stones. That rock had been quarried up far upstream and ferried down, and the smallest single hunk of it must be a meter on a side. That was damned impressive engineering for a muscle-powered civilization, even in this gravity, and especially for something as stalky and ungainly looking as a stilty. He zeroed in on one of the natives, still unable to believe deep down inside that they could have built that massive wall. As on Sphinx, what passed for mammals on Medusa, there were no birds. What were hexapedal? But that similarity ended here. Sphinxian beasties tended to the sturdy and blocky, aside from the arboreals like the tree cats, because of their native gravity. Medusans were tall and slender, trilaterally symmetrical to boot. The natives were undeniably warm-blooded and bore living young, but they reminded Stromboli far more of a hollow he'd seen of an earth insect called a praying mantis than anything he would have called a mammal, except, of course, that no Solarian bug had ever had its limb arranged equidistantly around its body that way. The dominant life form had freed its upper limbs for manipulation, just as man had, by standing upright on its rearmost limbs, but the legs were impossibly long and slender by human standards. Of course, that tripod arrangement did give them extraordinarily stability once they locked all 6 knee joints, but those knees were another thing that bothered Stromboli. Neither they nor the hip joints above them bent. They swiveled, and watching his stealthy walk made the lieutenant's stomach vaguely uneasy. God only knew what they looked like when they ran. The computer burped softly to announce the end of the systems check, and Stromboli laid his glasses aside and turned back to his panel. It was a miserable excuse for a planet, but its orbital traffic was all his, and he felt an unexpected eagerness to be about it. The mammoth countergraft cargo shuttle looked like an insect as it nuzzled alongside its Manticore and registry mothership. The customs pinnace tube to it looked more like a microbe, and two of the shuttle crews stood stiffly flanking the shuttle end of the access tube like surly sentries. Ensign Scotty Tremaine was not quite 13 Manticore years old on his first deployment after graduation, but something about the way they stood there wasn't right. He knew it wasn't, and they looked mighty unhappy when he first came aboard, so he turned to watch Petty Officer Harkins with casual interest. Petty Officer Harkins was, Tremaine suspected, a character. He'd had a peek at Harkins' personnel jacket before they'd left ship. The Academy instructors had always insisted on an officer should do that before taking command of a detachment, and he wished he'd had more time to peruse its fascinating reading. Harkins had been in the RMN for over 20 years, almost 35 T years, and he'd been up for chief 12 times by Tremaine's count. He'd actually made it once, but P.O. Harkins had a weakness, 2 of them in fact. He was constitutionally incapable of passing a marine tunic in an off-duty bar without endeavoring to thump the living daylights out of its wearer, and he lumbered under the belief that it was his humanitarian duty to provide his shipmates with all the little things the ship's store didn't normally carry. He was also one of the best missile techs in the service, which perhaps explained why he was still in the service. But what interested Tremaine just now was what Bosun McBride had told him before he left the ship. Tremaine liked the bosun, even if she did regard him as a none too bright puppy. She seemed to feel that someday, with proper training by the bosuns whose bounden duty it was to wipe ensigns' nose and bottoms and generally keep them from dripping over their own 2 feet, he might possibly make a worthwhile officer. In the meantime, her infinitely respectful suggestion surely managed to stop him just when he was about to put his foot in it. The ensign might want to give P.O. Harkins' head, sir, McBride said quietly. If anyone in the detachment can recognize a Crook's cargo setup, it's him, and she'd given him one of her deadpan smiles. I've discussed the importance of his assignment with them. So now Tremaine shifted position slightly, moving aside to lean his elbow on a freight conveyor where he could watch Harkins and still keep the corner of his eye on the crewman. Harkins was prowling around the neatly stacked countergraph cargo pallets with a copy of the manifest, checking canister labels. The weight of a magnetic tape reader bulged the thigh pocket of his coveralls, but the flap was still sealed. Now he slowed his label checks and bent a bit closer to the pallet, and Tremaine noted the way one of the crewmen by the tube tensed. Mr. Tremaine, Harkins called without turning. Yes, petty officer. I think you might find this interesting, sir. It was amazing what a fatherly voice could come out of those battered prize fighter features. Harkins sounded like a teacher about to demonstrate a classroom experiment for a favorite pupil, and Tremaine crossed the cargo bay to stand beside him. What is it, petty officer? This, sir. A blunt finger with scarred knuckles indicated the shiny silver customs tape running around the canister and, in particular, the Royal Customs Service seal with its small starship surmounted by the crowned manticore and flanking rampant sphinx and griffin of the kingdom's arms. It looked perfect to Tremaine. What about it? Well, sir, Harkins said ruminatively, I can't be certain, but the broad fingernail flipped the seal, and Tremaine blinked as it popped right off the tape it was supposed to be an integral part of. He bent closer and saw the clear plastic tape bridging the gap where the original seal had been sliced. You know, sir, Harkins went on in that same thoughtful voice, I bet those poor bloody pardons, sir. He didn't sound especially apologetic, but Tremaine let it pass. He had other things on his mind. NPA saws had been doing their best without the right equipment for so long. These fellows just got sloppy. He shook his head. A craftsman mourning slovenly workmanship never would have gotten by a regular customs man. I see. Tremaine glanced over his shoulder at the now acutely unhappy crewmen. One of them was sidling sideways towards the shuttle dug, and Tremaine nodded towards Private Cole. The Marine shifted position slightly and unsnapped his stunner holster. The moving crewman froze. What do you suppose is in there, petty officer? The ensign asked brightly, beginning to enjoy himself. Well, sir, according to this manifest here, this here, Harkins thumbed the canister, is a shipment of duralloy animal-drawn plows for delivery to the Hopman cartel back on Medusa. Let's open it up and take a look, Tremaine said. Aye, aye, sir. Harkins' broad grin showed teeth far too even and regular to be natural as he drew a force blade from one capacious bargain. He flicked the switch while waking the tooth-twisting warning wine manticore and law required of all such tools, and ran the invisible blade around the doctored customs tape. Silver plastic slivered in the soft shush of equalizing pressure sounded as he sprang the canister. He lifted the lid, then paused, frozen in mid-movement. Well, he murmured, adding an absent-minded sir as he remembered the ensign beside him. He shoved the lid fully up until it locked. Mighty strange-looking plowshares, I'd say, Mr. Tremaine. So would I, Tremaine said after a moment, leaning forward to stroke a hand over the lustrous, tawny gold fur. The canister was 2 meters long by 1 wide and 1 deep, and it seemed to be completely full. Is that what I think it is, petty officer? If you think it's Griffin, Kodiak, Max Peltzer, it is. Max Peltz it is, sir. Harkins shook his head, and Tremaine could almost hear the credit terminal ringing behind his ears. Must be $200,000 worth of them, the petty officer mused, and this one canister he added as an afterthought. And right off the controlled species list, Tremaine's voice was so grim the petty officer straightened and looked at him in surprise. The youngster beside him didn't look young at all as he stared down into the canister and then turned to glare at the wilting crewman. You think they were going to tranship them down to the surface, petty officer? They're in the warehouse. We can't rightly see anything else they could have done with them, sir. Sure think the stealthies wouldn't need them. My thoughts exactly. The ensign nodded to himself, then glanced around the dim cargo bay. Petty Officer Harkins, I think you'd better check all these other custom seals. The petty officer nodded, and Tremaine smiled thinly at the sweating shuttle crew. In the meantime, these gentlemen and I will go pay a little visit on their captain, and I want to arrange a visit to his main host as well, I think. Aye, aye, sir. The burly petty officer braced to attention, a gesture of respect he rarely wasted on ensigns who didn't yank him up on short for admitting it, and jerked his head to summon the rest of his two-man team as Tremaine, Private Cole, and two very unhappy crewmen left the bay. Honor shook her head as she finished Ensign Tremaine's recorded message, then flicked the terminal off, making a careful mental note of the way the ensign had credited Petty Officer Harkins, not himself, with the initial discovery. That was unusual in so junior an officer, but it confirmed her original impression of the youngster. She'd expected that when she'd assigned him to the Medusa detachment. What she hadn't expected was for him to confirm Dame Estelle's smuggling hypothesis quite this soon, nor, she admitted, had she expected to find a Manticoran vessel embroiled in it, and one uncharted to the Hotman cartel at that. She turned her chair to glance across her desk at McKean. The exec looked as if he'd just bitten into something sour, and Nimitz raised his chin from his cushioned rest to gaze thoughtfully at him. I don't know if Tremaine is more pleased with himself or worried over what to do next, she said. McKean twitched his taut shoulders. I imagine there'll be some interesting repercussions back on Manticore. Yes, ma'am. McKean's lips worked for a moment, then he raised his eyes to meet hers. You know Hoffman is going to deny that he had anything to do with it. 43 million in illegal peltries. Of course they will. Just as Mondragon's captains insist the space ferries must have brought them, Honor said ironically. I wonder what else Tremaine's going to turn up when he tears into the ship's main hold. Trouble, Captain. McKean spoke softly and seemed to be struggling with some inner conflict, and she raised her eyebrows. The exec shifted uneasily in his chair, then shied, and some of his stiff formality seemed to fall away. Whatever else Tremaine finds, Hellman is going to insist they didn't have anything to do with it, and you can bet they've got the paper to prove they didn't. The best we're going to manage is to nail Mondragon's master and probably her purser. It's a start, exec, and the paper mania may not be as cut and dried as you think. Look, ma'am, I know we don't always. The lieutenant commander broke off and bit his lip. What I mean is you're going to make the cartel very unhappy with you, and they've got friends in high places to make their unhappiness felt. You've got a shipment of illegal furs, but is it worth it? Really worth it? Honor's eyes hardened dangerously, and he went on quickly. I don't mean it wasn't illegal. God knows it was, and I can see what you're going to do. But the day we leave Basilisk Station, things are going to go right back the way they were. This is probably a flea bite to them, something their cash flow won't even notice, but they're going to remember you. I sincerely hope they will, Commander, Honor said icily, and McKean stared at her. His eyes worried. For the first time in far too long, he was worried about his captain because she was his captain, but there was no give in that dark armor-plated glare. But you're going to jeopardize your entire career over something that won't make a difference, he protected him. Captain, this sort of thing is what we're supposed to stop. Her voice cut across his like a dagger, and he winced as he saw something else, hurt under the anger in her eyes, hurt in something else, condemned perhaps, and that got deep, too deep. He closed his mouth, and her nostrils flared. Commander McKean, she said in that same cold voice, my duty is not affected by what others may or may not do to discharge their own, nor do I care which criminals may engage in a criminal activity on my watch. We will support Ensign Tremaine to the maximum. In addition, I want an extra effort devoted to all other vessels, Commander, chartered by the Hotman cartel. Is that understood? Understood, ma'am, he said unhappily. I appreciate your concern, exec, she said sharply, but Fearless will discharge her responsibilities, all of her responsibilities. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Dismiss, Commander. He rose and left her cabin, confused and worried, and the burden of a strange, deeply personal shame